When your old career gives you lemons, throw in some ice, mix in some vodka, and call it a podcast. From the Mac of All Trades studio in Fairport, and driven by Victor Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram, it's Billified, the Bill Moran podcast.
Thank you for getting your pot on. Thanks for telling a friend. That's how we spread the word about the pirate ship. Today will be a little different. You got me, and you know I have talked about my love of drinking. I like the social setting. I like the people. You know, I enjoy that. Even in our open. Life gives you lemon, some vodka in it, and away we go, right? And I'll say this, most people think alcohol causes bad behavior. And I think that's the most comforting lie that we tell ourselves. Because in that instance, alcohol gives us permission to stop managing parts of ourselves we already struggle with, right? Whether it be self-esteem, maybe avoidance, you name it. Put a name on it, whatever you're struggling with. And when we use drinking as an excuse, we miss the opportunity to actually grow. Why? Because when we blame alcohol, it deflects painful self-awareness. Any shame that we had. I was drunk. Responsibility for negative consequences, right? Allowing for continued drinking, right? And then you can frame alcohol as a solution or external force rather than a choice. It wasn't me. It was the alcohol. It's a great psychological buffer, allowing people to frame aggression, risky sexual actions as separate from their core self. That's what alcohol does. Shifting responsibility and avoiding the shame of being seen as inherently bad, maybe a deviant, I don't know, whatever you're doing with the sheep down, an alcoholic, right? You don't want to be called that. That's identity deflection. We deny problems to maintain a positive self-image. If alcohol is the cause, I don't have to look deeper. I know what the cause is. I'm not so sure about that. This weekend, I had a lot. I had some fun. Yeah, I did. I had a moment where alcohol was certainly involved, and when I look back, harm happened. And that's why I really thought a lot about this. And I thought, I think I got to do this one on my own. Because there were three things that happened at once for me. And I noticed how quickly my mind reached for the explanation. I was drinking. That's why I reacted that way. Someone was very upset with me over what I thought was kind of trivial, a business matter. But to them, it wasn't, right? And it hit me at a moment that I wasn't ready. At the same time, like almost the exact same moment, I had a family member do something that deeply concerned me, and they weren't listening, and it was really kind of frustrating me. And I misread a text. And I responded rather coldly when I normally wouldn't, because I wouldn't have misread it. I wouldn't do that. And these were things that were all, again, happening at once while drinking. And I responded in a way that caused harm. But the explanation didn't actually explain the behavior. It just kind of closed the case. And that's when I had to think a lot about this. I had to stop and actually pay attention. And I realized how often we all do this. Right? Because what do we say about alcohol? It doesn't create, it reveals. That's really what it is. It doesn't create, it reveals. How many times did you drink because you felt looser? Your inhibitions are gone. Of course you feel looser. How about the person who's so funny when they're drunk, but is a little more quiet and reserved because they probably wouldn't say those things? Inhibition is basically your internal brake system. It's the part of you that lets you pause, kind of filter, and choose instead of just reacting. And how many times in this podcast have I said, if your knee-jerk reaction is usually the wrong reaction. Add alcohol, inhibition's gone, there's no brake system. Inhibition is what allows you to think. Maybe not that. Before you say or do something that you can't take back. Maybe not that. Maybe I shouldn't do that. And when you think about regulation, it takes work, right? It requires attention. You got to be restrained a little bit. You have to have some restraint. Not you're not that you're restrained, you know. But I mean, in a way, it's like mental handcuffs on you. I gotta restrain that and stay there. Your brain has to override automatic reactions, right? And stay oriented towards something bigger than what's happening in that moment. That's the kind of control. It isn't passive. It costs energy. That kind of control costs energy because it's not a passive one. Your mind is always working. You got the, you know, and so alcohol doesn't change what you care about. It changes how hard it is to act in line with it. Come on, man. Alcohol doesn't insert thoughts. It removes the friction. It's a nice lubricant, right? Say whatever you really wanted. Ever have that done to you? Someone comes up drunk and says they really want it. Maybe you've done it and realized the harm you caused. How do you get back from that? That's kind of the thing. You know, it's like the editor leaves the room, not the author. The author's still there, spitting it out. Your values are still there when you're drunk, but the effort required to live by them is a little harder to access. So when you're drinking, I always think the brain gets mentally nearsighted. Tone gets misread. Intent gets guessed, right? You're guessing. You have no idea. Meaning gets filled instead of checked out or checked, right? You want to be able to kind of put it in check there. At the same time, your brain becomes more defensive. You ever notice that? You become way more defensive when you've had a certain amount of alcohol. Neutral cues can start to feel loaded. And ambiguity starts to feel like danger. When something isn't clear, it feels like danger. Alcohol narrows perspective and raises suspicion. Nuance requires complexity. Nuance disappears when you're drinking. And complexity is one of the first things that it's gone. When you're drinking, it is gone. You get fewer shades of gray, and things become, at least in your reactions, more black and white. Subtlety takes regulation. Alcohol makes regulation actually expensive. You know what I mean? It really does, because you can't really do it. So it becomes expensive to not have that. Think of it like a dimmer switch. Got a dimmer switch anywhere in your house? Alcohol doesn't change the room. It lowers the lighting. Right? It lowers the lighting. You see the same thing when you're exhausted or overwhelmed. You have less patience, faster reactions, shorter fuse. That's not a moral failure. And that's the thing, is that you can't beat yourself up. It's not a moral failure. That's depleted regulation. Responsibility is not the same thing as self-attack. One leads to growth. The other shuts people down. That's really kind of a very important thing to think about, right? You're thinking about taking responsibility. It's not self-attack. It leads to growth. Self-attack shuts people down. Most people don't avoid responsibility because they're careless. They avoid it because somewhere along the way, responsibility became painful. That's why it's so easy to blame alcohol. I was drunk. What do you mean? Come on, you know me. For some people, responsibility meant punishment. For others, responsibility meant rejection or humiliation. Avoidance is often protection, not denial. Absolutely. You're not denying that it's there, but I mean, I think about that in your own life. All the things that we avoid sometimes, and alcohol can help us do that. And then we can blame the alcohol, and it's not really us. We get to preserve our ego. And then think about like shame, right? Shame doesn't teach. Shame threatens. It turns reflection into survival. And when you're in survival mode, you're not changing. Growth stops. There's nothing there. Shame does attack who you are as a person, not what you did. Here's the thing. A lot of adults still hear the word accountability as you're in trouble. Not repair, not learning, consequences. But real accountability isn't about paying a price. It's about staying present with what happened long enough to actually change. That's what you're looking for, is change. You can keep doing the same thing over and over again. You're going to get the same results. Different players, same story. Responsibility held with shame collapses us. Responsibility held with clarity actually frees us. Let me say that again. Responsibility held with shame collapses us. Responsibility held with clarity frees us. Because you understand what you're doing. Take responsibility, right? Taking responsibility doesn't mean you're bad. It means you're honest. That's the difference. You're honest. I see what I did. When there's no alcohol, you can still have the same thing. You ever see anybody overreact? Maybe something you posted online. Maybe a partner's upset about something you did. I don't know. It's the emotion, though, is disproportionate to the actual moment. This is the same pattern, just without the substance, right? You get an intense, overwhelming surge of emotion. You ever have that yourself? Like an intense sense of fear instead of staying in the moment, or anger, maybe even anxiety about what's going to come next. And it triggers your body's fight or flight response. And it shuts down rational thinking. And guess what's gone? Any effective communication. Almost any action is nearly impossible. And a lot of times when people overreact, what's usually happening isn't a loss of control. It's a loss of time perspective. Something in the present moment touches something unfinished from the past, and suddenly the nervous system isn't responding to now anymore. I call this old material getting activated. You ever have that? And a lot of times when we drink, old material is anything we didn't fully process when it happened. You got hurt. There was shame, fear, rejection, powerlessness. It doesn't disappear. It just goes quiet. And when something in the present feels similar enough, could be a tone, a word, a look, a perceived slight, the body reacts as if the old moment is happening again, right? I know this. I know how this feels, right? And you get defensive, or you get just ugly. That's why the reaction feels bigger than the situation. It is bigger than the situation. It's carrying more history than the moment deserves. The reaction to stuff isn't wrong. It's misplaced. It belongs in an earlier chapter of who you were. When old material gets activated, the present becomes a stand-in. So the person in front of us becomes a symbol, and the response comes from an older version of ourselves. That's why when you say to somebody, calm down, it never fucking works, ever, right? Some people get, how pissed off do you get when somebody goes, calm down, especially when you're drunk? You can't calm something that thinks it's still under a threat. Understanding this doesn't excuse harm. That's not what I'm saying. But it does explain why people can feel genuinely confused after, like, why did I react like that? Right? Why did I react like that? I don't understand. Because the reaction wasn't about what happened. It was about what got remembered. Reactions are about history. They're not about moments, especially big ones. And it doesn't have to be when you're drunk. but that's what we're talking about. And we externalize responsibility on things all the time. Most avoidance is not dramatic at all. It's pretty quiet, right? And it's usually misunderstood. We tend to think avoidance means running away from something, but more often it means redirecting responsibility. When something uncomfortable happens, when we hurt someone, when we overreact, or when we act out of alignment with who we are, responsibility for that creates tension inside of us. Not guilty, exactly, more like pressure. And human beings are very good at relieving pressure. Externalizing responsibility is one of the fastest ways to do that. When we say, I was drunk, or I was angry, or I was stressed, what we're really saying is, I don't want to sit with what this says about me. I don't want to sit with what this says about me. So I can deflect. Those explanations always feel true, right? But they're incomplete. Because when you're externalizing responsibility, doesn't mean we're lying. It means we're prioritizing emotional relief over understanding. We just want to feel better. That's it. I don't want to understand the situation, right? Blame works quickly. Insight works slowly. Avoidance isn't weakness. It's protection. It's a shield. At some point in many of our lives, taking responsibility felt unsafe. Maybe it meant punishment, right? You did something, you had to take responsibility. Usually we're in trouble. How many times? Or a coach, you're responsible for this, or a teacher, or whatever. Maybe it meant rejection, because now all of a sudden you're the bad person because you did that. Maybe it meant shame. So we learn to move responsibility outward onto substances, alcohol, or to emotions, or to certain circumstances. And we're not doing it to avoid growth. We're trying to avoid pain. That shit sucks. It's painful. Any kind of self-growth sucks. It just does at times. I think even all the time. You can feel good at times, but think about it. Why do people stay in what's called their comfort zone? Right? The problem is whatever we move outside ourselves, and when we do that, we also lose the ability to actually change. If alcohol caused it, I can't work on it. I mean, come on. What do you want me to do? I love to drink. If anger caused it, I can't regulate it. I get angry. I got a hot temper. You ever hear that? I got a hot temper. The Irish temper, as I was always told. If stress caused it, I can't address it. It's stress. It's just life. It's just what happened. And so we externalize responsibility. It gives us relief. And I really think, honestly, it costs us agency. Growth begins the moment we are willing to hold responsibility without attacking ourselves. My friends, that's not blame. That's adulting. Right? It's adulting. That's why substances, emotions, stress, they all work as shields. We're hiding from something. Alcohol takes us to a fun place. Drugs take us to a more fun place. Right? They all work the same way. They don't explain behavior. They shield us from it. They give us something external to point at when we're looking inward and it feels uncomfortable. I was drunk. I was high. If it was alcohol, I don't have to ask what I was avoiding because it was the alcohol. If it's anger, who wants to look underneath the fear? If it was anger, I don't want to have to look at the fear underneath. If it was stress, I don't have to face how overwhelmed I really am in any situation. And here's the thing. Any of these explanations They're not wrong. They're just incomplete. They protect us from shame, and they block growth at the same time. A shield can keep you safe, right? Captain America. But you can't move forward while you're hiding behind it, no matter what it is. And when you say, I didn't mean to, and it feels sufficient, you're saying, I didn't mean to, because it protects how we see ourselves. It measures us that we're still a good person. Here's why saying I didn't mean to feels sufficient, but it really isn't. Saying I didn't mean to feels sufficient because it protects how we see ourselves. It reassures us that we're still a good person. I'm still good. Come on, you know me. Intent matters, but it only explains us to ourselves. It doesn't undo the impact on someone else. I didn't mean it. I was drunk. But it doesn't, the impact is still there. When we stop an intent, we get emotional relief without real accountability. I didn't intend for that to be that way. And then we stop there. Growth starts when we're willing to care about the impact, even when our intent was good. Right? You ever have that, even in a sober moment? You say something and it's like, that's not how I intended it. But when we start to care about that, that's when growth comes. Excuses, truly, they're emotional painkillers, man. They work quickly and they block any healing. Right? Sometimes it's alcohol. I was drinking. Sometimes it's emotion. I was angry. Sometimes it's stress. I've had a lot going on. Sometimes it's personality. That's just how I am. It's Bob being Bob. You know? It's just Bob being Bob. Bob gets away with anything. Sometimes it's intent. I didn't mean it like that. Different word, same function. They help us feel better without asking us to change. They move responsibility away from the self and onto something outside of us. They lower the emotional pressure of the moment. And they let us stop asking harder questions. Different excuses, all of them, same function. They give us relief without resolution. I'm going to ask these questions slowly. And obviously they're rhetorical. But think about them. What part of me becomes harder to regulate when I drink? It's going to be your self-esteem. I don't know. What feeling am I trying not to feel? What pattern does this moment belong to? What would responsibility look like without punishment? Alcohol didn't cause the harm. It revealed where attention was needed. Growth doesn't come from excuses or self-attack. It comes from the courage to look beneath the moment. I'm Bill Moran. We'll see you tomorrow.